Welcome back to a very special edition of Tears for Fears on the FanSpeak Network. Today we are joined by Remy. He goes by Cote, and he is on DraftKings, and he plays tiers and does mass multi-entry. And listen, I love covering tiers contests, but this guy knows what he's talking about. So he has been so kind to join me. Remy, how are you doing today? And thank you so much for joining me.
Not too bad. Looking forward to talking a little tier strategies, NFL, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get started on this tier strategy show, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. And you may want to tell a friend, because I think you're going to learn some things from Remy. We talked pre-show and he knows what he's talking about. I think I'm going to learn some things. I'm taking notes. So I think you should too. So let's, kind of dive into the history here really quick before we get into the strategy. How long have you been playing DFS? How long have you been playing tiers, and why tiers for you?
Yeah, so I got into DFS in late 2016 and started really playing more seriously in 2018. I've migrated to the tiers format practically full time, just as it's a time saver for me. I have a 9 to 5. I have 2 young children at home, so 6 to 7 p.m. is crunch time, and so I don't have a lot of time to monitor 700 players, especially with NBA.
Right.
And so I think tiers is a great option for anybody who's looking to get more seriously into DFS, but that doesn't necessarily have the time to do, all the necessary studying and lineup crunching and, all that comes with building lots of lineups and playing multiple sports.
Right.
And that's the other advantage. So if you want to play more than one sport and you don't want to monitor 1,500 players, just, get into tiers.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I had done a show on the Mayo Media Network last year, and I had kind of done an intro show with strategy. As I meant to do it this summer, but the summer just kind of got away from me. And I talked about reasons I love tiers. And for one, I love not having to do defense, because that just drives me crazy when I get that wrong in the classic slate. And I love not, like you said, having to worry about all those other players. Like, you just have those limited players that are available to you in tiers. So, if some lone cheap guy on the classic slate goes off, you don't have to worry about it because it's not in tiers. So like you said, it's less players to focus on. But there's, it sounds easy. It really does. It's not easy.
No, that's right. People often think, well, there's no salaries to worry about, so therefore it must be easy to win. Well, no, not necessarily.
Not necessarily, but no. So you've been mass entering all the different sports. For NFL, you've been playing that, you said, since about 2018?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So now let's kind of talk like strategies for NFL, because obviously I do dabble with tiers for the other sports, but NFL is the one that I obviously spend time with content on. We do the weekly show here on the FanSpeak Network. So let's talk NFL strategies. First let's talk ownership. So I found in pulling some data that, it's kind of like classic. You don't have to get contrarian everywhere. I found, like, if you're getting contrarian, like sub 15% owned in like at least 2 tiers, that should be a good goal. Is that what you're seeing, or what do you see in ownership, or where are you trying to get ownership leverage?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You don't need to have the 2% owned player, especially in the main slate where there are 8 tiers. People might be trying to play a little too contrarian. It's okay to play. Josh Allen's going to be probably 50 or 60% owned. It's okay to play him and bring him back with his receiver, which is a popular combination. As long as, you could have a 10% owned player in tier A. You only need 1. You don't need to have 5 or 6.
Right. Okay. So you're saying, so just look for like 1 or 2 low owned guys is what you try to do too.
Right. Exactly. Well, and there's a big nuance between the main slate, where there are roughly 1.4 million different combinations, versus the afternoon and primetime slates, where there are about maybe 17,000 combinations. So that's a huge difference. You don't have to worry to getting different shouldn't be your main priority when building a couple of lineups.
Right. And again, you're mass entering. Don't you love when people say, well, you're playing 150 lineups, of course you're going to win. When you say all those combinations, you're like, well, no, there's, So I play about 20, and I talk about that on the show. So maybe you can give me some notes for player that plays about 20 lineups, because it probably has different strategies than what you have playing 150 lineups in the main slate, for different
Right.
tiers.
Well, when you play a lot of lineups, you could have the one or two far-fetched lineups, so really contrarian, dig a little deeper. You get exposure to everybody, but that doesn't mean it's a positive EV lineup.
Right.
Each lineup you build should be technically less EV than the previous one.
Okay.
So once
Right.
you get down to 150, that 150. So it's a big puzzle.
Right. Right. Well, I'm just impressed that we talked pre-show that you hand build 150 lineups, because there's not a lot of tools out there for tiers, and that you're hand building 150 lineups in Excel, I think is super impressive. But you explain the way you do it. Can you tell people a little bit how you do that?
Right, sure. So when I say hand, I don't like Megan mentioned. I'm not,
Writing out on a paper.
On my phone on a piece of paper. I built an Excel model that I've, improved over the years. So I just upload the projections, salaries, and it's click and drag basically. And that's how, So that's how I start building. I have access to optimizers. I usually just set a couple of basic rules, ownership rules, click crunch, see what spits out, and just to give me a sense of where the ownership might be going, or where the popular players or popular plays, and that's how I try to get contrarian. But I don't import my crunch into DraftKings. I build all those lineups by hand. And I think that's where my edge is. Somehow.
No, that's good. It's good to find where your edge is, right? So that's good that that's where your edge is. Where do you look for, like you mentioned the Josh Allen thing? Like, I'm not going to try to dodge Josh Allen for ownership reasons this week. Do you typically try to find ownership leverage more in tiers 5 through 8?
Yes, a lot. And some players will go all in on the tiers that have less players. 1 to 4 maybe, and that's where you get your edge. You rarely find a player that is above 30%, especially in tiers 8 through 7. So that kind of comes naturally,
right?
But and well, I guess we'll get into stacking later on, but you sort of get a natural diversification when stacking, and whether or not you bring it back with another.
Right. Well, that was actually my next question is, we talked about stacking, and I always talk about consider stacks, do stacks, don't force stacks every time. This week, Josh Allen is a perfect example. They have a high team total against the Jets. Very well could be that you need him with Diggs or you need him with Davis, but it could just be you just need Josh Allen. So I kind of try to say that from data that I've seen, it looks like you want about 1 or 2 team stacks. What do you try to implement when you're building stacks, or what are you seeing with stacks?
Last year, I absolutely forced stacks in practically all my lineups, and I sort of let my foot off the gas with this year, especially when it comes to Josh Allen, who can get there with rushing upside, who doesn't need to get Diggs to, have 4 touchdowns to actually get there. And it all depends what the field is doing also. A couple of years ago, 2018, 2019, practically and stacking wasn't that popular. So if nobody stacks, then you should stack. And if everybody stacks, well, you shouldn't stack.
Right.
But I think we're at a equilibrium where the field is getting sharp.
Yeah,
and
of course.
The edge of versus stacking versus not stacking is really fading throughout the years. I still do it, but I'm more cautious, especially like I mentioned with Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, especially when you have tier 2, you have Eckler, Tyreek Hill, and Jefferson, where these guys could all go off with 40 points. Right. And now you're stuck with your 20-point Diggs lineup and missed out.
Right. Okay.
But
so
I won't force it, but I will have exposure to Diggs and Allen stacks.
Of course. So again, you are definitely stacking. But you're not forcing stacking as much as you forced it last year.
Exactly.
Basically.
And I pick my spots.
Right.
Let's say we're in tier 1, say for Tua, I will go with Hill.
Right.
I will stack Tua with Hill. probably at 80% of my exposure to Tua will have a
Tua,
Tyreek Hill
yeah.
lineup. But like a quarterbacks with rushing upside, Josh Allen, you could forego Diggs.
Right. Okay. No, that makes a ton of sense. And you told me pre-show that like you watch like what a lot of the other mass entry players do, and people have totally different strategies. There's guys that win without stacking. There's guys that win with
Right.
stacking. Right.
Exactly. It's a really interesting to look at the process.
Right.
For everybody who knows McLovin, he's
Mm-hmm.
top player in the world right now. He doesn't stack, or at least doesn't force it. If a stack comes, it's natural.
Right.
And you have on the other hand, you have Oxenduck, who's also a top 10 player in the world,
Mm-hmm.
who forces stacks and game stacks.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. That's fascinating to me. Like two of the top players in the world, opposite strategies.
Right.
So wild stuff. All right. Now let's talk quarterbacks. Like, for someone like you, like you said, you're probably getting exposure to most of the guys in tiers 1 and tier 5. For someone who's watching this show, who's playing 3 lineups, or maybe someone like me who's playing 20 lineups, anywhere from that 3 to 20, like what would be your strategy in tier 1 and in tier 5? Like, I think you have to limit it more, right? So
Right.
what would you recommend to those type of tiers players, or someone just getting into tiers,
I'd build, say, for somebody who's building 3 lineups, I'd have exposure to probably 3 quarterbacks in tier 1.
So you'd rotate tier 1 essentially.
I'd rotate, and
Yeah.
I'd stack. If I'm playing Kyler Murray in tier 1, I'm going with DeAndre Hopkins
Sure.
in tier 3.
Right.
And I mean, you have to.
Right.
Your lineups need to tell some story, and that
Of
story
course.
needs to have the less chapters as possible.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good line. That's a good line.
Yeah. So you need to have the least uncorrelated events to happen.
Right.
So I'm going with Hopkins, and I'm going to bring it back with say I'm playing Kyler Murray, like I mentioned, Hopkins, and I'm going back with Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf,
Mm-hmm.
and just hope that game goes off. You have to hope, and if no games go off, it means that you have to be picking basically names out of the hat, and it's a dark path to go through because there's so many options. You're not going to hit it.
Right. Right. Okay. So what would you do in tier 5 when there are more quarterbacks? If, how many, let's say for someone like me who does 20 lineups, I tend to pick around 3 quarterbacks in tier 5. So I'm not spreading myself too thin. Do you like that idea, or would you do another strategy?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, what you need to look is can you play 2 quarterbacks from the same game?
Okay.
Josh Allen's playing against the Jets, no quarterback in tier 5. That's okay, because he's getting high total anyway. But if you go to Kyler Murray, he's getting Geno Smith in tier 5. So I would play those 2 together and just, hope the game goes off. And is that the only one this week? Tua, Herbert? Yeah, it's the only one you can go with the bring back. So if you are playing one lineup of Kyler Murray, go with Geno Smith, both receivers, and to fill in the holes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So the less lineups to play, the more stacking you like, kind of. But let's say you are playing 10 to 20 lineups, like me. I do, like I said, about two quarterbacks. I fade 1 or 2 in tier 1, just to kind of try to pick that guy and get it right. Especially on a week like this, where I do feel really confident about a Josh Allen or something along those lines. And then in tier 5, I pick about 3. Any recommendations you have for some like that type of player?
Yeah, well, that'd be fine, because they're all slightly similarly projected for this week. I swore to myself to never play Matthew Stafford ever again. And that's
I've had that same conversation with myself. Yeah.
I had that narrative on week 3 with Derrick Henry. I swore to myself to never play Derrick Henry again, that he was a broken player and he couldn't never play football again. And it's on a 2 game sample.
Right. Yeah.
It's horrible. And ended up going off in week 3.
Right.
But that's another story. So once I swear off a player, it's probably a good idea to play him.
Right.
But in this case, no, I wouldn't play Matthew Stafford. I'd just go with the projections. Would
you take like the top 3 guys based on the projections?
I would.
Yeah.
I would.
Okay.
And pick the least own of the 3 if you have a sense of where the ownership is going.
Right. Okay. As far as like the nuances in the skill position tiers, I kind of feel like, and tell me if you feel this way when you're building lineups, especially like you said, your earlier lineups are the more plus EV and they kind of go from there. But I kind of feel like in the tiers like 3, 4, 6, like the range of outcomes could be wider because they could have some of these receivers or running backs that just go nuclear, and
Right.
could maybe outscore somebody in that tier by like 20, and you need that guy. Whereas in tier 7 and 8, I kind of feel like maybe the range of outcomes are sometimes a little less, and maybe I'm more concerned about floor ceiling combination there a little bit more. What do you think about nuances in those skill position tiers? Let's start with tiers like 3, 4, 6, where it's those like, well, obviously 3 and 4, like those stud running back receivers, and then 6 can be tight end receiver running backs, but obviously still could have guys that go off at ceiling plays. What do you consider in the nuances there? How do you handle that? Do you lean one position over another? Any strategies there?
Well, it's all about lineups and not the players individually. So once you start, I usually start with the quarterbacks and bring it back with the stack. And once that is set in, I'm going to ask myself how owned is that lineup going to be. So say I have, I don't know, Josh Allen, he's going to be, I don't know, 50-60% owned.
Right.
I wouldn't mind going with maybe even Tyler Boyd in tier 6, who's probably the least projected of the 6 players in that tier. So depending on the lineup you're building, I would try to gauge ownership and just pick the least owned one. It is so random. It is more random than we think. And I used to lose, I'd lose time and effort and brain power over arbitrary decisions that I just, sort of gave up this year. I'm just a Pittman or St. Brown or mix. Well, they're not projected the same, or let's say Mixon or Fournette. I don't know.
Right.
Pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one. I'm not looking at yards after catch or ADOT or anything like that. It's just that's where you need some luck.
Right.
So I wouldn't lose too much time on tier 6. Go with the projections, and if you feel like you need to get a little contrarian, pick lower in the order.
Okay, so you lean more into projections in that tier. What about in tiers 3 and 4 with those like super stud running backs and receivers? Do you lean into projections there, or do you typically like playing like receiver versus running back? Anything there that you typically like lean towards as a strategy?
Let's say, for instance, in tier 3. Well, this week is not a good example because we don't have a. Let's say we had Kyler Murray in tier 5 as a quarterback. Oh, I'm sorry. Derek Carr. Say we had Derek Carr as a quarterback in tier 5. I'd play Adams with him, and all the non-Derek Carrs, I'd go with Jacobs because they're not they're not correlated. So
right.
Anytime Adams makes points and you don't have Carr, you're losing ground to people who have the stack.
Right.
So yeah, I usually go with a running back if I don't have the quarterback.
Okay.
To go with it with the receiver. And again, there's a lot of luck involved in this. One of them, and last week we saw it. One of them went for 40 points, and all the 4 other players had duds, had really bad games. We had what was it? Was it AJ? Yeah, it was AJ Brown who had a monster game.
Right.
And people played AJ Brown without Jalen Hurts, which I thought was completely ridiculous. And well, the person actually finished first had that.
Right. Because Tua ended up outscoring Jalen Hurts by a few. Right. Yeah.
And he was the least projected player in the tier was AJ Brown.
Right. Right.
So you just don't know.
Right.
Right. I mean, but we don't.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that is especially true in week 2 and 3, where I think it's where we have the most. Early on in the season, there's a lot of recency bias where people think, after week 1.
But we don't have enough data yet.
We don't know
at all. Yeah.
One game sample, 2 games.
I was going to say, now I feel like we're starting to know. Like, it's one thing I'm starting to learn is I want to play players against the Lions. So, I'm definitely have more interest in Aaron Jones. And we talked about this, before the show, don't usually play Aaron Rodgers, but this week I might play Aaron Rodgers because he's playing the Lions. So, yeah. So, there's a lot of interesting nuances there. In tier 7, I mean, I do feel like tiers is a very like, you have to consider like the floor ceiling. Do you feel like in tier 7 and 8, those guys, you do want to just kind of dodge those horrible floors? Because it is so weird. Like, like you said, some tiers, the disparity of points is so large that you need to have one guy. And then in some other tiers, they can have, and I looked at this in data last year, there could just be like 3 guys within a 5-point range, and the winning lineup, depending on the size of the tournament, may be able to get away in a tier 2 with just, the second scoring guy or the third scoring guy.
Exactly.
But that all depends on right, how wide the range of the points in each tier. So again, a lot of nuances there. But do you really consider players' floors in the tiers, especially in the later tiers, or do you really just focus on ceiling, I guess is what
I just focus on ceiling and median projections. I rarely look at floor. One thing I like to do is build a cash. I don't actually play cash, but I like to build a cash lineup. The first lineup I build is a cash lineup.
Sure.
And whatever comes out, I try to make sure that my GPP lineups don't look like the cash lineup I just built.
Okay.
So once it gets too similar, I'm gonna get duped, or I'm not gonna get enough leverage, or etc. So I try to stay away from floor, concentrate on ceiling and median projections.
Right. Okay. I mean, any other strategies or action items that you would recommend for someone who's just getting into tiers or hasn't tried tiers yet?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the first thing you want to do, well, once I start my week, I usually I download the CSV from the previous week and study what the guys are doing. A couple of players I like to watch more than others. And once the lineups are set, let me go back a second. First, before I look at projections, before I look at Vegas lines, I have to look at start times to see where I could pivot, where I could late swap. And I think that's a massive edge. And I'm pretty sure not a lot of players don't late swap.
Especially in tiers. I know
tiers,
it's become more common in classic, but especially in tiers, I imagine no. Yeah.
It won't necessarily make the difference between losing $5 and winning 20,000, but over the long run, you might get a couple of percentage points in ROI. And some lineups are dead before the 4 o'clock game start. So you might want to, keep a spot or two. If you're hesitating between 2 players, pick the one that's in the late game.
Okay. Any other strategies that you recommend for somebody just getting into it to kind of make them feel more comfortable to give tiers a try?
Sure. And once the contest starts, download the CSV. The first thing you should do at lock is download the CSV and look at your ownership. How own are your players? Where do you stand? So once it gives you a little, if you like watching the games, well, you can sweat it out. Cheer for some players who are low owned, high owned, whichever you have in your lineups. And if you have 2 empty slots left, or players that you could swap to, late swap, right before the 4 p.m. games start, re-download the CSV again. Where do you stand? Are you behind? Are you up? If you have a low-owned player that is crushing it in the early slates, you might want to swap out a lower-owned player for a higher-owned player. You can eat the chalk if you have a low-owned player who went off in the early slates, and vice versa. If you have a highly-owned player who didn't have as good as a game as you thought he would, swap out a chalky player from the late games to a more contrarian one.
Right.
That's a really low strategy.
We talked about it. This week's going to be tough because there's only 2 games, but why did they do that to us? Right. But I mean, usually there's at least 3, if not 4. And that gives you a little bit more, obviously.
Right. Just a quick word on that. It's actually tough because you don't have a lot of time, and sometimes you get a late, touchdown that flips everything. But if you play the primetime slate, that's actually the best slate to do it, because you have a whole day's worth of time to switch your lineups. And
that's a great point.
The CSV, how many dupes do I have, and you can adjust to make sure you're different for the Monday night.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a whole strategy session on the short slate. Maybe we could do one before Thanksgiving, if you don't mind coming back on.
Sure.
Because I love it on Thanksgiving Day. I think there's Christmas Day games this year.
Yeah.
And of course there is always the 4 p.m. the prime time. So I don't know if people realize that, but if you don't realize that, it's not just the 8-tier main slate. There are these 6-tier short slates that are really interesting. And I cover and then of course playoffs. Once we get into playoffs, it's 6 tiers. and
Yeah, those
definitely
are fun
some new,
slates. I love
different
those slates.
nuance. What did you say?
I love those short slates, the December Saturday slates and the Thanksgiving
I
slates.
was
Those
gonna
are my
say the
favorite slates.
Saturday slates in December. Or do you like those better?
Oh yeah, I love them.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love building them. They're a lot of fun. I love it, and late swapping too.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like you're getting the answers to the test before the test is over, basically, when you have 3 different start times. So yeah, that's a huge edge.
Exactly, exactly. Well, yeah, I think we're gonna have to like circle back here and do like a definitely a short slate strategy session before like we've got the Thanksgiving, Christmas, the December games, the playoffs, so people can have these short slate strategies too. Because this has been super informative for people who are interested in getting into tiers for the main slate. Any final thoughts before we head on out of here?
All right, well, listen, this week's actually challenging. Be on the lookout for injury designations, especially in tiers 8, where we have two. When you have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who are both late starts, so they will be very, very low owned. If you want to, feel like you want to roll the dice, take a shot with Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf in tier 8, and you could always pivot to one or the other if one of them is injured.
That's
And
awesome.
that would be my strategy. Yeah, injury designation. Every slate is different, and this week I think that's where we'll probably find the most edge.
Well, Remy's been very kind. He's going to join me. We're going to do another show really quick where we break down the week 9 tiers and go tier by tier and hear, his favorite plays too, and kind of go back and forth on our favorite plays. But this has been super informative just from a strategy data perspective, and just kind of like, again, for people who are just getting into it or want to get into it. So thank you so much. Be sure to follow him. It's at Del Cote on Twitter, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so at Del Cote on Twitter, be sure to follow him. Look for him at the top of tiers leaderboards, because I guarantee you're going to find him there each and every week. He knows what he's doing. We appreciate your time so much. Before you guys get out of here, again, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the FanSpeak Network. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.